What is up, friend? I am here to help you make your mixes better inside of GarageBand. Here I have just a simple drum loop I made out of GarageBand. I just kind of picked a drummer, picked a style, and I got this loop. Let's listen. Right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this loop and I'm gonna show you how to make it sound a little bit more realistic, a little bit more punchy, and kind of follow the path of what a mix engineer would do to this type of kit to make it sound bigger and fuller and a lot more lively. So we're gonna get right into this, and the first thing that I wanna look at that I see a lot of in people's sessions is at the beginning here, when you pick a loop, when you decide like, okay, this loop is great, I like this, whatever, and the loop actually starts at 1, there is a slight, you could call it almost like an error inside of GarageBand. If we come over here, and let's just go to the beginning of this measure right here. So this is a full waveform right here of the kick, right? So if we go all the way to the beginning, we can see that this is not quite a full waveform. You see, the more we zoom in, we kind of lose it. Now, for some reason, when we push play inside of GarageBand, you actually hear it, but whenever you export this, a lot of times it gets cut out. And the same thing happens whenever we have the loop go. So I'm gonna push play and then skip us to this last measure, and when you hear it come back, we'll actually lose that first note. Right, but that first note's actually there. Right, it's because it's in the middle of the transient. So if you imagine that, let's just say, I think this is probably a snare, but either way, you can see that it's cutting off that very beginning, that transient, which is the very beginning of the waveform here. So what I recommend to kind of fix this is whenever you're setting up your loops and you have everything going, generally I like to have people start their songs either at measure 2 or measure 3. GarageBand gives you this count in, which is like a 1, 2, 3, 4 that can come in before the session actually begins. But I want you to basically create your own. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start the entire song at measure 3, just to keep the odd numbers, and we can start at 2 if you'd like. But now you have 2 measures of full count in, and what it allows you to do is zoom in here, and to fix this error that GarageBand gives you, it even shows it to you right there when you click. It's missing. You're missing a little bit. So you can do this, and now you have that full transient that is right on the beat there, which sounded way different from where I had it before. All right, so that's the first thing to make this work. So now, since we like the way this kit kind of sounds, I'm going to separate the drums. So we're just imagining here that we're at the mixing stage of this track. And what we're gonna do is we're actually going to turn off all of these different buttons here, which makes it sound like this. Nothing, right? Because nothing's engaged. As soon as I engage the kick, all right, so we just have the kick there. Now, I like the kick not to have any room or any tone like that, because there's already a bit of room in the recording, as you can hear. Right? And so I try to keep this as dry as possible, and I don't want to put any plugins on this. We just want to keep it exactly as it is. Now, we're going to basically export each of these instruments. So we're going to export the kick, we're going to export the snare, the toms, the hi-hat, and the cymbals, so that we have them all separated, so that we can kind of EQ and mix them separately. Another way that we can do this is to duplicate the track. And duplicating the track can help, but you're duplicating a bunch of these software instruments. So let's just say we are going to, where are you? New track with duplicate settings. Right, so that's going to bring this in. So now we have 2 software instruments when we really are going to need about 5 software instruments, which can kind of build up on your computer. So if you export them as audio files, which I'm going to show you here in a second, it just saves on your computer usage. Your computer doesn't have to work quite as hard, and you can add some more plugins to your drums. So we're just going to go to Share, Export Song to Disk. Of course, if you have other stuff in your session, you want to make sure that your kit is soloed there. And we're just going to throw this in the downloads and call this Kick. Wave, for sure, uncompressed 24-bit. It always puts it there as like a default if you haven't done this before. And then export cycle area. So we're going to export this really quick, which took 2 seconds. And then we're going to do the snare. And we're going to call this snare. Our settings are all good. I'm just going to roll through this really quick. Toms. Export song to disk. Export. And then we've got hi-hat, share, export song to disk, HH for hi-hat, and then we have cymbals. I'm going to call this sim. All right, perfect. So now I should be able to grab each of these. Here's our kick. We're going to align it exactly where we had that export so that it stays correct there. We're going to grab our kick, our snare. Then we're going to grab our hi-hat. This is just the order I typically do it. Kick, snare, hi-hat, toms, overheads or cymbals. Toms. And, I almost lost it there. And cymbals. Sweet. So now this should sound exactly the same. So how we can do this is basically push play and I'll mute and unmute, and all you should hear is the sound getting louder versus any like phasey kind of out of time sound. Right, so now we have the kit. The kit's good to go. So we can keep this muted or you can delete it. We're not using that anymore. Perfect. So now that we have our kit, we can start mixing this. So we're going to start with the kick drum here. I'm going to open up the plugins, and the very, very first thing that I'm going to do is we're going to do a little bit of cleanup EQ here. So I'm going to drag the EQ to the top, and we're going to find a couple frequencies that might not be working, and we're gonna exaggerate some frequencies that can help us kind of boost the energy of this kit here. How do I know what frequencies to kind of boost and cut? Well, that brings us to the sponsor of the video, which is QuizTones. So QuizTones is an amazing app that I've been using for over 10 years now. QuizTone helps you train yourself into knowing what these frequencies are. So basically, it's a multiple choice test. It plays frequencies, and you have 4 options to pick on what frequency you think it is. And over time, you start to develop the skill of knowing around where these frequencies are. And it really helps you start to identify where you might be lacking frequency or where you might need to boost. And that really helps you figure out how to manipulate frequency inside of all instruments, inside of mixing, and honestly helps you to become a better mixer. So let's listen to this kick, and typically, from what I'm hearing so far, I might need just a little bit of cut in this maybe 100 hertz area. So we're gonna make one of these bands super, super kind of narrow here and try and find the frequency we need to get rid of here. Okay, so that's a very small thing, but kind of just made it a little bit tighter. Now we're going to go to a free plugin that is not a stock plugin called the Klanghelm DC1A3. It's a really, really good plugin for compression on a kick drum. We're going to hit this deep. That just gives it a little extra deeper compression sound, and this is a really simple to use. We use this input as almost like our threshold, so we're increasing the input to the compressor, and the more we increase it, the more compression we're going to get, and you see how much it's compressing by this gain reduction here. Let's do it. Awesome. So I want to show you that these like simple techniques can make a big difference. So we're going to turn these plugins off and on. right? It's kind of it's a little more forward, a little more intense. I'm gonna lower the output volume just a tiny, tiny bit. Okay, so now we're gonna add another free EQ by the Fuse Audio Labs. It's called the RSW2395C, a rough name, but this thing's awesome. This is gonna add a little bit of snap to the high end of the kick, and then we're gonna might add a little bit of low end as well. Awesome. Let's hear it with the rest of the drums. It's a pretty big difference. It's more drivey, more intense. All right, so now we're gonna do the snare. We'll listen to the kick with the snare. So on the snare, the first thing that I'm gonna add is a compressor actually. So we're gonna do that same compressor, the Klanghelm DC1A3, and play around with these settings. Awesome. Now, I'm not hearing anything that really needs to be taken away. These drums do sound pretty good on their own. So we are going to actually add that same EQ on the snare that we did on the kick and just add some high end maybe, and maybe some 110 hertz. Let's see how this sounds. Awesome. All right, let's hear it with the kit. Awesome. Now we have the hi-hat. Let's listen to the hi-hat on its own. Okay, so the drums kind of sound mono here, like everything's coming the hi-hat's slightly to one side, but it's pretty much right down the center. So I'm gonna make this kit kind of sound like it's a drum set, right? We have our snare in the center, we have our kick in the center, and then our hi-hat is to our left, like we're the drummer. You could do this from the perspective of the stage where you're looking at the drums and the hi-hat is on the right actually, but for this example, we're gonna do it kind of on the left. Cool. All right. And then the cymbal, we're going to make it over to the right, almost like we're hitting the cymbal on the right. All right, and so the hi-hat, we don't really need any compression or anything like that, but I am going to add a little bit of high-end, just a little sparkle from this EQ. Whenever I'm boosting, especially high-end, low-end, I mean, even the mids, really, anytime I'm boosting, I like to pick a more analog-style EQ like this. Whenever you boost with this type of EQ, it just doesn't quite sound as good. It's just a little bit more digital sounding. So we're just going to keep that one off, and let's boost around a little bit. Awesome. And then we have our toms. Let's see how our toms are. Whoa. All right. So we're just going to add a tiny bit of compression on our toms. We're just going to use the same compressor. This works really good on the drums. Cool. Let's see. All right, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of some low end and high end of these, just for effect. All right, so now we have our kit. Let's hear. Everything together. Whoops. Just for reference, this is what it was before. Oh, nope, that's not what it was before. Let's turn these on. So much beefier kit. It sounds real. It sounds really nice. So now what I want to do is I want to recreate the room tone to make this entire kit sound a little bit more natural. So let's create an export with this entire kit here. So everything that we've done so far, we're going to export this. And we are going to call this drum room. Wave, uncompressed 24-bit, all that is exactly the same. This should export super quick, and then we can grab it out of our downloads, make sure it lines up. Perfect. And then we'll solo this and make sure it kind of sounds the same. Definitely sounds the same. Okay, so now we're going to add a reverb. And the first thing that I want to try is by... let's see. Let's try the spring. This is supposed to be kind of like a spring verb sound. Let's see how this sounds. I'm going to bring this mix percentage down so I can kind of hear like what it's going to sound like with the rest of the kit. Actually sounds kind of cool. I want to hear, let's bring this mix percentage all the way to 100% wet. And I want to cut a lot of the low ends out of this. I don't want all those low ends, and I really don't want all those highs that are in there. And then the reverb itself kind of sounds like a basketball. And anytime I hear like a tone like that sounds kind of like a basketball bouncing, that's usually in this like 1K area. So let's listen to this. Awesome. So this is without the EQ. Whoa. With. Sounds kind of crazy right now, but let's mix this in real quick. That's a huge difference. I'll mute it. And unmute it. Pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. So the last thing that we're going to do on this reverb is I want to add some pre-delay. So what pre-delay is it's basically saying when this, we'll just use the snare drum. When the snare drum hits, right now with the pre-delay off, that reverb's going to start immediately. So it's immediate. Now, as you add pre-delay, it's basically saying, okay, if you think of yourself in a live like concert room, the guy hits the snare, the sound travels from the snare to the walls, bounces off the walls, and then that kind of becomes the reverb sound. So the higher you bring this millisecond delay is kind of like, in a way, the bigger the room. But honestly, the more separation you have between that snare drum and that reverb sound. So if you have this pre-delay at to off, sometimes if you're using more of a washy sounding reverb, it can kind of blend the sounds together and make things kind of muddy and unintelligible. And the way to add separation is to use this pre-delay in milliseconds. I use it all the time in reverbs, and it's a big reason why I like this free reverb here, because it has the pre-delay. Some of the stock GarageBand reverbs don't give you the option to mess with this pre-delay. So we're just gonna play with this and try to get a cool sound. And I'm gonna bring the reverb up a little bit so you can really hear what the pre-delay is doing. All right, and just one other tip that you can do, you can actually add a little bit of compression to the room sound as well. That people do that a lot. We'll just show you that example. This kind of depends on the rest of the mix on if you would want to do this or not, but I'll show you how this sounds. Really what it does is it brings out all of the reverb. So it brings out the quieter parts of the reverb, and it contains sort of the louder parts of the reverb. You don't need to do this all the time, but it does help if you have a super, super busy mix and you're trying to get that sound past everything else. But in this case, since we don't really have anything on this track, because we're just using this as an example, we're going to just kind of have it blended to taste here. All right, and then now we're gonna do a snare reverb since we're here. So we're gonna export, well actually we already have the snare technically. Oh no, we don't have the snare with the sound, so we are gonna export. So we'll call this snare verb. Oh, I've done this a couple of times. 001, we'll say. A lot of times I just throw these in my downloads because it's so easy just to grab them, and then I have a bunch of extras because the session keeps all this information within it, of course. All right. So for fun, let's try a stock reverb on this one. We'll do the Space Designer. See if we can't find something cool. So let's do maybe since this is kind of like a faster tempoed song, maybe we'll do like a medium medium room. Let's do something like what is this? Green Chamber. We're just gonna listen to these. See if we can find something that we like. And we'll keep the kick up as well. This is a good example. There's no pre-delay. You hear the snare, it's like immediate, this ja, ja. It's really, really intense. And I might show you one little trick that you can do to kind of fake a pre-delay in here, but we're just gonna use this sound because it does sound kind of cool. So I'm gonna do the same thing. We're gonna take a lot of these lows out. We really don't need those. We're gonna muddy up the mix, a lot of the highs out. This will kind of push back that reverb a little bit so it doesn't take over the snare. And then we'll take this dry output, turn it all the way up, or sorry, all the way down, and then our reverb out we'll just kind of bring up just so that we have enough volume. And then let's find a good balance here of this sound. All right, let's hear how this sounds all together. Sweet, that sounds pretty good. So there's one trick that you can do where you can kind of fake pre-delay. So we're gonna zoom way in to this, and we're gonna just slightly move it back. Right. Since there's no pre-delay on that reverb, it's just faking it. We're physically moving that snare back, so it's causing that reverb to come a little bit later, which does make this snare drum sound a lot more in your face. All right. So the last thing that we're gonna do is I want to show you something that you can make your drums even bigger and even crazier. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna solo the kick, the snare. Sometimes we'll do hi-hats just for fun, and then toms. We're gonna keep the cymbal out of this. A lot of times the overhead cymbals can kind of cause a mess when you're doing this, but we're gonna create a parallel compression track. So we're gonna do another share, export song to disk, and we're gonna call this para drums. I might have one of these. Nope, great. All right, then we're just gonna bring this guy, liner up. We'll turn these off, make sure we have what we want here. All right, So what we're going to do is we're going to compress the crap out of this thing. So we're going to use that same compressor that we've been using. I'll have a link down below that has the links to all of these free plugins that I use all the time. I've been trying out free plugins for a long time, and I have a list, an ongoing list that I use and I think are really, really great. So we're going to turn this output down a little bit because we're going to really overdo it and just crank these to oblivion. Here we go. Yeah. So we're also going to add that same EQ, and we're going to just boost a little bit of highs here. Not too much. And a little bit of lows, not too much. Okay, now we're going to turn this down, bring up our whole kit, and kind of mix this to taste. It makes a huge difference. All right, let's listen to what we had before. And after. So this is already starting to sound a lot more realistic. It's bigger, it's huge, it's larger than life, and these are techniques that you can use in your songs to really take advantage of these drums that are inside of GarageBand. You can play with them and make them sound even crazier than I have just made them, but I really hope some of these techniques help. And if you have any questions, of course, definitely put them down in the comments, and I will try to get those as fast as I possibly can. Thank you so much for watching, and I really hope this helped you. My biggest goal is to help you release more music, to help you write more music and feel comfortable with making it sound good, and so that you can show it off to your friends and your family and your fans. That's the entire goal of this channel, and that's what I want for you. I will see you in a couple days for another video. Have a good day, friend. Peace.